Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with behavioral scientist Jon Levy. His first book was The 2 AM Principle, Discover the Science of Adventure, which was released in 2016. And his next book was You're Invited, The Art and Science of Connection, Trust and Belonging, something he's built that's just been absolutely phenomenal. It's been an environment that has invited some of the most powerful and influential people in the world today to come together from a place of the 4 principles he spoke about in part 1 of the show. Now, if you didn't get to hear part 1, please go back and hear it. But he talked about the need to create environments that are based in generosity, in novelty, in being well curated, as in you didn't just throw it together, and somehow to create a sense of awe and wonder. We talked about in part 1 the ideas of these things. Now we're going to talk about today, the time, the place we're in, which is a post-pandemic world. As we're recording this, we're going into 2024. What's evident is that the pandemic, of course, we all had to work from home unexpectedly, but there was good things about that. It was a pretty terrible thing at the time, but there were some good things about it. And one of the things that was good about it is, I think that I wrote about it and called it that there's a great resignation. And I said it was the great reevaluation, in that people got to stop and say, what am I really doing? Does this really matter? Do I really give a shit about all the things I'm working for? I'm trying to get a bigger house and a bigger car and maybe I don't care. And it was good. People stopped and they reevaluated what mattered. And that resulted in the great resignation and quiet quitting and those kinds of things. And then there were people who couldn't quit. They were caught in as what I call wage slaves. They had a job, they had to go, they had to do it, but they had an option to have a little more time at home with their family. And that was important. Now companies are asking us to come back. And of course, there's a resistance to that. And many people are certainly in the hybrid version of it. According to Apple research, that's not really working either. So how do we bring people back together in a way that connects us? Because that's what it's about. If you've followed me, I've written about this, about what it is that we're actually looking for. It's not just to be working in the same place. In fact, Gen Z and even many millennials say that they want to be surrounded by friends. They don't want to just go to work. That was my generation. The work-life balance thing is nonsense. Now it's a work-life blend. How do we come together? Jon's got some really good ideas on this that I really want you to pay attention to. I encourage you to take out a notepad and a pen and take notes on this, because this is an issue we've got to deal with directly. Because if you're a company and an organization, you also have to examine who are the people who are working for you. How do you build that community? Because it's a high priority, much more than you ever considered. When you're thinking about your business, now it has to have community as part of it. So, Jon, I want to hand it over to you. What's your thoughts on this?
In May of 21, I published an op-ed in the Boston Globe. And in it, it was titled, this is such a provocative title, "The Hybrid Workplace Probably Won't Last, and Here's Why." And in it, I shared kind of just a pile of research. And it ranged from, when we look at the great predictor of if you're going to live a long time, it's not if you did some kale cleanse or intermittent fasting. Number 2 is strong social ties, close friends and family. Number 1 is something called social integration, the number of people you come in contact with. If you want to look at company success, you can track company stock value, employee sick days, and profitability to level of trust in an organization. If you want to know if somebody's going to be happy in life, if they have friends at work, they're 2 or 3 times more likely to be happy in general. And if you want people to stick around, ask them if they have a best friend at work. And if they do, they're far more likely to stay at that job. If you look at team success, like you want your team specifically to win at whatever they're doing, the great predictor is psychological safety. Can I say something that goes against the group without being afraid that it's going to cause me to get punished or kicked out? So it means that trust and belonging are critical for literally anything we care about. And my argument in the article was that when you actually look at the things that make work worth it, it has to do with the human aspect. And if companies are willing to make the effort to create culture at distance and take work time and turn some of it into time for bonding and connection, then you can really have a healthy remote work culture. But since most companies just aren't going to make that effort, then they're going to see some people are going to leave, and then they're going to mandate everybody back because they're going to not want to lose their workforce. They're kind of stuck. And as far as employees, sure, right now there might be a lot of places that are trying to hire, but the moment that there's an economic downturn that's great and companies have all of the bargaining power, then you're going to see everybody's going to be forced back into the office full time. Now, here's what we want to understand, a few things. The first is that at no point, even when there was a 5-day work week, was everybody going in. It was probably closer to like 4 days a week because certain people never went in. They were a traveling salesperson. And if you were in like marketing or whatever, you'd take meetings with your agencies and all that kind of stuff. And then people had doctor's appointments or had to go pick up their kids. And there was never 5 days a week in the office. So the question is, what is the right number? And none of us know. We just don't. The 5-day work week used to be 6 days, and it used to be 12-hour shifts until Henry Ford and Orthodox Jews complained, and it became 8-hour days, 5 days a week, so that the Sabbath could be off, and so that people had time to actually buy Ford's product because they spent Sundays at church. So it's all made up and it's all kind of BS. Let's just start off with it. So if we are going to move forward, let's ask what's really important. And let's ask, how do we actually create? So the first thing that's really important is, if you are going to have an office culture, you need to bond your employees both at distance and in person. And trust is literally built the opposite way that everybody tries to build it. So Dov, at some point in your career, did somebody try to take you out for a business dinner to pitch you on an opportunity?
No, that's never happened to me. Of course.
Never.
The answer is yes, but not with you.
And if you talk to people in the business world and you ask them to rate that experience, they give you like a 3 out of 10. I want you to think about that. That is probably the most common way to pitch, and nobody likes it. And yet we keep doing it. It's like me saying, Dov, I know you don't find me charming or interesting, but I have Taylor Swift tickets. Do you want to hang out? So what does actually work? And the answer is the exact opposite. It's called the IKEA effect. And the IKEA effect says that we care more about our IKEA furniture because we have to assemble it. So I, in my talks, will often I've invented a series of games that are specific to this concept. And I have people play the game during my talk in groups. And what they discover is that in 5 minutes playing this game together in a breakout room, they are more bonded than with months of being on Zoom calls. And the reason is that when you invest effort into people, you actually care more about them. The key is to start off with getting people to invest a small amount of effort in you and raise it over time. We need to find ways to get people to invest effort into each other at distance that is not pure transactionality. Right now, if we're working on a project, it's like, hey, Steve says you need to pass me the files, thank you. That's not a real investment of effort into you. That's a transaction. The second thing is to understand that people think that if you trust me, you will be willing to be vulnerable. But it turns out that the opposite is true. It's because you're willing to be vulnerable that trust is created. And it follows a predictable 4-stage or 5-stage process. Stage 1, the first person, let's say me, signals vulnerability. Do you have any pets, by the way? Just for the example.
I do not.
Kids?
Lots of kids and grandkids.
Okay, perfect. So let's say I call you up and we're talking and it's 8 months ago and I go, Dov, I'm about to have my first kid. I'm kind of freaking out. I've never changed a diaper. I have no clue what I'm doing. In that moment, I've signaled vulnerability. Now, if you ignore me or make fun of me, trust is reduced. But if you acknowledge me and says, John, I totally get it. There's so many kids in my family, but before I had my kids, I never changed a diaper. So now you're signaling vulnerability to the same degree. I was so scared, but somebody taught me, don't worry, we'll figure this out together. I'll show you everything you need to know. The moment that I see that you've signaled vulnerability to the same degree, trust increases to this higher level. So person 1 signals, person 2 acknowledges, person 2 signals, person 1 acknowledges, trust increases to this higher level. In order for trust to be created, we need to find opportunities for vulnerability loops to occur. Now, in an office setting, if I drop some papers and you help me pick them up, it's natural. If I lean to you and crack a joke, you laughing closes the loop. But on virtual platforms, that stuff doesn't exist, which means that we need to really be intentional and be retrained on how trust works. And so if I want to actually develop a meaningful relationship with you, I will find something to talk to you about. So I might see something in your background and say, oh, Dove, I see those photos. Who's in that? And that in itself is a vulnerability loop. It gives you an opportunity to open up. Or one of my favorite questions, Dove, is what's the first question after "can you hear me" that you have on a virtual platform?
Can you see me okay? Online.
Sure. And then after that, you say, oh, how are you doing?
Yeah, how you doing? It's the general one. How's your day?
All right. Now, the moment that you say, how are you doing, what do people almost always say?
They swear at me. They say FINE, which stands for effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. Fine. They say fine, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, they say fine. And then you say, right, yeah, fine. Now, here's what's really interesting about this. That's essentially me opening a vulnerability loop and you smacking it away. So my favorite vulnerability loop on digital platforms is how are you doing? Because if you were to say, John, how are you doing? I'd say, oh my God, I had the craziest weekend. I'm a little worn out, but I took my child for her first flight. It was to Austin and she was, oh my God, she was in so much pain from the pressure change. I had to like bounce her the entire time. But even though it was like really tough, the time we spent together in Austin was amazing, and I really felt like I bonded a lot with her. Now I'm human. Now I'm not just some person. And then when I ask, after sharing something like that, when I ask you the question back, it gives you the opportunity to open and close the loop too. And that kind of stuff is critical if we want remote culture, but it's also critical if we want in-person culture. Because if you have no connection with people on the digital platforms, the idea that you will somehow come into an office and actually want to talk to anybody is zero.
Exactly. So one of the things we talk about in building cultures of belonging, and it's exactly to your point, John, is that everybody's trying to build trust. The analogy I give people all the time, I do this live from the stage, is I go, in your mind right now, what I want you to do is I want you to picture somebody who is a close, loyal, trusted friend. I want you to picture somebody you've known for, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. You pick the date, whatever it is, but it was a loyal, trusted friend. You got one, John? And you go, yeah, of course, right. And I say, now I want you to pick somebody who has been an acquaintance, but you've known them about the same amount of time. I go, have you got one? You go, yes, of course. And I go, okay, so what's the difference? You can't say time because I just took that away. And then they get to it. And I said, it's reciprocal vulnerability. The difference is very simple. The person who is your acquaintance either showed you vulnerability and you dissed it, or you showed it them and they dissed it. But the person you have a relationship with that's trusted, it's reciprocal vulnerability. And what is reciprocal vulnerability? Let me just tell you what it is so you understand it. I'm going to use a very technical term. It is they know your shit and you know theirs, and neither of you is willing to use it as a weapon. You use it to bond with each other. That's what deep, trusted friendship is. And you must do it with discernment. As a leader, you must go first. That's the job of the leader. But on top of that, don't emotionally vomit, because I think a lot of times people think vulnerability is about emotionally vomiting on people, and nobody likes that. But a little bit at a time and just watching if that comes back. And for me, if it doesn't come back, it's okay, because I'm willing to give it a second go. But if I've given it 2 or 3 or 4 goes and nothing's happening, you're going to move into the category of acquaintance. But if you can tell me what's it like having kids, if you could tell me what was it like to meet your wife or your best friend, or what are you struggling with right now, I'm totally willing to go there with you. And guess what? We're now best friends. Would you agree with that? Is reciprocal vulnerability, is that?
I think you point out this perfect example of, in order for a person to feel safe, they have to see that people are sharing at the same degree, right? That person A and person B, you call it reciprocal, right, are vulnerable to the same degree with each other. And if that doesn't exist, then it really makes people uneasy, because then they feel like they overshared and they experience a vulnerability hangover.
Exactly.
So if you say something like, oh my God, my best friend just died, and I say, good luck with that.
Bye.
Right? Like, okay, well, we're never talking again. Yeah. Now you're going to be kicking yourself for the next few days, being like, how could I say that to him? And what kind of awful person is that their response? I open up like that. Now, you don't know the other person's life. It could be that they're going through something terrible, but the general premise is that just about anything's a vulnerability loop, and it's our job to be on the lookout for it.
Right. So this is my point, John, that I want to ask you about. Do you think that we've become a little sort of numb to it, that we're not really noticing? Because I think that people are not really paying attention. We're all caught up in our own shit so much these days. We've got CNN, we've got Fox, we've got all the social media stuff. We've got 2 wars as we record this going on in the world. And there's economic challenges and a housing crisis and a million other things we could name, that people have gotten a little, I don't mean this in a mean way, but they've gotten self-absorbed in their own stuff. And that I think that a lot of times people just miss that vulnerability loop, or that open door at least.
So let me say a few things. One, yes, we are experiencing what some people say is an empathy overload, right? I just can't feel anything for the person who needs money on the street because 30 times a day I'm being shown awful pictures of everything else. Now, it's called empathy fatigue. That's what it is. Now, would not say that we're getting numb to it. We might be getting fatigued, but that's different. And I'd also say that numbness suggests that we have developed skills and just don't feel it, right? Like you've spent too much time in the cold. You have the ability for sensation, but you've gotten numb to it because of the situation that you're in. I'd actually say it's worse than that, because then all you need to do is thaw out. I would say that because of helicopter parenting and a bunch of other kind of social elements that have all come together, then it was a skill that was never developed. So human skills are what some people refer to as anti-fragile, meaning things that are fragile, like this glass that I'm drinking out of, if I drop it, it shatters. Things that are anti-fragile are things that when you apply pressure to them, they actually get stronger. So I go to the gym and I lift weights, I might be sore for a couple of days, but then my muscles grow back stronger.
It's an anti-fragile process that makes you stronger by doing it rather than weaker, although you will feel the pain of it, of that fragile situation. It will make you stronger as a result.
Yes.
Great book, by the way. In case you haven't read Anti-Fragile, read it.
Yeah. The importance of this is that social skills, like empathy or like the ability to handle vulnerability and trust, these are all skills that we develop during our early years when we learn to interact. And we learn the consequences and how to read social cues and all these things, and we screw up a lot and we feel bad, and then we learn from those things and the skill develops. If we do not have those experiences, then we never develop the skill. And that's why I was saying it's worse than being numb. The base element has atrophied and never grew to its potential to begin with. And that's what I think is going on, because we just don't know any better. We've spent so many generations outside of community that people don't even know there could be another option.
But there's a resistance. I'm working with corporations and with very high-profile leaders, and there's this idea that it does actually fall onto the balance sheet, but it doesn't directly fall on the balance sheet. And so they don't see the value of those, what we used to call soft skills, that human side. And as a result, it's so undermined and underplayed, but it's so vastly important. And I believe, and I want to hear your point on this, I believe this is going to become far more valuable in the AI age. Like a lot of people think, I just don't have to bother with that now because we've got AI. And I'm like, no, you need it more. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that that it's important to separate a few things out. The first is, people called it soft skills, but that's because you weren't working with metal, right? Like that hard skills were hard things, soft skills were not, right? So probably like being a seamstress, something like that would be considered a soft skill back in the day too. The human-based skills, I think you're accurate with, which is when AI comes and assists most people. It brings somebody who is working at the level of a 7 to maybe an 8, but it also brings somebody who's working at the level of a 2 to a 7. And so then the question is, okay, if their work doesn't, like if there isn't a huge variability all of a sudden because we get training wheels basically for everything that we do, then what will be the difference between employees? Well, those employees that can work together on dynamic teams that can handle open communication and presenting and pitching and all that, those teams are going to far outperform. Now, there might be a date in the future where AI will take over all of that too, and who knows what the workplace will be like, but we're talking for the next generation or two. The most valuable things I can think of are the ones where I can have a conversation with a human being and they can hear what I'm saying.
As we talk about moving into that, quote, future, and we look around the world, as somebody who has been really specialized in researching human behavior, when you look at, I'm a polymath, we talked about that in the early part, certainly following geopolitics as well as all the other things, and there are things that stand out. I'm old enough to remember the threat of the Cold War, and then the wall came down, and that seemed to go away, and now that seems to be back on the table again. There's trouble in the Middle East, not particularly new, but it's bubbled up again. There is homelessness in major cities that look a lot like images from the Great Depression. There is big pharma, big agriculture, climate change, all these things. When we look at this piece around behavior, and you and I know this need for community, and human beings are, by our very nature, tribal, but we're behaving in a tribal manner, which is different than being in a tribe, that we're adversarially tribal. What do you see around? I've got my own ideas of it, but I really want to hear from your point of view. What's the way that we reach across the aisle in these very cloistered silos we're building up that are around politics, that people don't trust their governments anymore? They don't trust big banks. They don't trust big organizations. From your research, how do we break down some of that? I realize it's a big question.
It's a big question. So there's kind of two basic options. If you want people to connect, you either need to help them find their common ground, or you need to create it. So it's either this thing called the mere exposure effect or something called multiplex relationships. These are big terms that are really kind of irrelevant. I just like sounding really smart, so I say them. But I will translate the things that actually make sense and then make fun of researchers for giving them terrible names. I did probably the largest study in history on dating with Moran Cerf, who's a former guest of yours. And what we ended up discovering is that opposites do not attract in any way, shape, or form. But the more similar we are, the more likely we are to date, down to our initials. If you have the same initials, we are 11.3% more likely to date. Now, that's crazy. So what does this actually tell us? It means that if there's a way for us to find common ground across any two people, then we can see the opportunity for us to connect and have conversation. The second thing is, if we can't really find common ground, then the answer is in creating common ground through shared effort. So my dinners, we accomplish it by cooking together, but it could also be done by helping build housing for people, or volunteering at a soup kitchen, or it could be tutoring kids. You know, there's an infinite number of ways that we could increase the rate of social bonding between people and participate in pro-social behaviors. Are you part of a soccer club? Are you into arts and crafts? Do you participate in a bird watching group? All of these things allow people to connect across what they think are a big social gap. I want you to understand something. The left and right wing, as you would call it in the United States, is wildly more similar to each other than they were 250 years ago. 250 years ago, if we disagreed politically, it was because I believed that power should only come from divine heredity of a monarch. And the other side would disagree and say, no, power should come by the people and for the people through a democracy. The gap between those two is so much bigger than the gap between, we all want voting rights, but I want to have this thing that shoots bullets and you don't want me to. And that's a small gap. That's something we can figure out, especially when, frankly, most people agree that there needs to be some kind of protections in place so that kids don't have to go to school scared that they're going to get shot. But the perception of a major difference is what fuels media and so on, and causes us to think that there's this giant gap between us, which doesn't exist.
But there's money in that. And that's the challenge. I'm a founding member of something called Starts With Us. If you don't know what that is, I encourage you to go have a look at that. Started by Daniel Lubertsky, who is behind Kind Bars. And we are dedicated to showing people that we're way more similar than we are different, particularly from extreme left to extreme right. And it's important for us to do that. But there's way more money in advertising money, in clickbait money, in showing how different we are rather than how similar we are.
I learned that from taking that Friends test on BuzzFeed. I'm such a Ross and you're such a Chandler. We're just too different, buddy. We can never get along.
This is the silliness of it, is that we're being manipulated and we go along with it. And for me, a lot of it is this waking up to the fact that you're being manipulated into being different. I was speaking at the UN with my very good friend, Tony McAleer, who was a neo-Nazi. And when asked, Dov, how could you possibly assist somebody who was a neo-Nazi who advocated for the annihilation of your race? I'm like, because I could see how similar we were. He was a highly intelligent, highly articulate young man with a good sense of humor who was looking for a place to fit in. So was I. We just went down different paths. And that's the only distinction. And as a result, we've become great friends. And as a result, he started The Cure for Hate, and they've made films with him walking through Auschwitz, and he speaks at Holocaust museums and is making a huge difference because we were willing to see the similarity rather than the difference. And this is where we can all get on board with this, is what is so different about us. You're a fan of Jon Levy's, and you go, what's he got in common with Dov? Let's start off. We were both born Jewish. That's a born faith. Whether you live it or not is, I don't know. But on top of that, we both were severely dyslexic at school. We were both unpopular for our own reasons. There's a ton of common ground we can go to that. We have people in common. We have ideas in common. And I'm sure there are many things we believe very differently about. And we can examine those things and we can be...
We already discovered one. I'm such a Ross and you're such a Chandler on the Friends BuzzFeed quiz. How is it that I could even be friends with you? This is an outrage.
Exactly. So this is what we need to come to, is this willingness to go to that center ground. But again, from a point of view of organizations, how do you and I, John, let's solve this problem for a minute. How do you and I, okay, we're going to partner and we're going to join up and we're going to say to corporations, this is how you fix this problem. And here's where you're resistant. I'm just not sure if they're getting it.
Can I be honest? I don't think any of them are, at least the ones I'm talking to, are resistant. What they are is they're unsure if the solutions will actually have an impact on the metrics that matter to them. Because there's a lot of stakeholders and nobody has the perfect answer right now. I do a lot of work. The metrics are fantastic, but if you have a 100,000 person organization, very few people are going to be able to come in and say, hey, this is what actually is definitively going to work. And it's risky. So it's slow because if we begin with small experiments, and getting anything done at a big company takes way too long. And so I think that everybody's searching for the answer right now. The problem is that the big consulting firms are probably not really well poised to handle this. They're fantastic at cost cutting. They're fantastic at restructuring and all these other things. But when it comes to actually being human and understanding how to bring humanity to a place where you treat people like a disposable widget, then you're probably not going to find the answer there. And so the easy solution is to just tell everybody to come into the office. But that masks the real problem, which is that they never did any work to connect people when they were away. So I think it's more complex than it's an issue of stakeholders, and it's an issue of fundamentally understanding communication. Because if you notice, every piece of communication that comes from a company is about like, we're more productive together. And what the employees hear is, oh, great, they want to control us, they want to take our freedom away, and they want to fill their offices because they feel like they're losing a lot of money on their leases.
Exactly. And forcing people to do things they don't want to do has never worked. It's just never worked.
The funny thing is, it might only depend on the length of time. A lot of people would have said, no, I don't want to work from home. And now that they have it, their memory is short, and now they don't want to give it up. I'm not promoting by any stretch of the imagination to force people back, but sometimes it's literally that hump of how do I get somebody to go to the gym? So if I give you a ride to the gym and we make plans to hang out together, then suddenly you have a better, healthier routine.
But the fundamental piece is where we started. When I talk about cultures of belonging, when you talk about your work, is this understanding. My research was in quantum resonance fields, and I talked about this with Moran. You talked about with the obesity and the impact of that in multi-generations of friendship. And it's the same thing with any of this. If you can have people understand the benefit of it, a lot of companies are very concerned because they're not keeping the people and the people are not sticking around. And I said, okay, but this generation doesn't do that. My generation was asked what you want to do for a career. It was a 40-year question. Now it's a 4-year question, career, not job. So those people are going to go back into the talent pool. But if they have a bonding experience with your organization, they're going to go out into that talent pool and say to other people, hey, you got to go work for Dov, or you got to work for John, because it's so great working there. I felt like I was part of something bigger than me, and I built some great friends there. In fact, I'm still friends with them. They're an evangelical force for your organization because of culture. If you could get, that would be a big insight.
Have you ever heard of the elephant, the rider, and the path?
Of course.
Okay. So one of the favorite examples that I wrote about in my last book was telling the story of how people enter Walt Disney World.
Yes.
Now, Walt Disney World is in Orlando, Florida. You come up, drive in, go up an escalator, get to a ticket counter, buy a ticket, and then you go down a monorail that lasts 23 minutes to get to the front gate. And the question is why? Why not just put the ticket counter at the front gate? And the answer that was explained by people at the Disney Institute was that Disney is the happiest place on earth, and it's a business that they want to succeed. And a 5-day family pass at Disney is like $1,200 is what people end up spending, give or take. And a average household in the U.S. after taxes at the time was earning like $44,000, which means that when mom or dad would buy...
So that's a big chunk. It's a big chunk.
Yeah, it's buyer's remorse at its heart. Now, I don't think Disney would ever call it buyer's remorse because it's not on brand, but they realized that, and if you've ever watched the payment process, people go to their kids, you better enjoy every damn minute of this, right? Like it's not a pleasant experience.
You really enjoyed this.
Yeah. It's supposed to be the happiest place on earth. And so what they realized was that the average length of time that the buyer's remorse lasted was about 23 minutes. That way, when you enter the Magic Kingdom, you can actually create great memories with your family and you're ready to spend again. So everybody wins. Most companies try to logic people into this. It's better for you if you come into the office. And people might understand that on a logical basis. That doesn't get me to go into the office. It doesn't get me to go to the gym. Now, there's a second option, which is I can speak to your emotions. Now, if we were going to give an analogy of the human brain, we would say that your conscious portion is a rider sitting on an elephant, which is our emotions, our mechanics, and our biases. In the morning, that rider can make sure I eat a healthy breakfast. But as it gets tired, that elephant is just way too big and way too strong. If I see a candy bar on my counter at 5 p.m, I'm going to go eat that candy. That rider is too tired to ensure that I have a healthy habit. And so in this model of the elephant and the rider, a smarter company will speak to our emotions. How good would it feel to do A, B, and C? We miss you. We want you to come into the office. We want to hang out with you. But there's a third option. You see, if I don't have any candy bars in my house, it doesn't matter what the elephant wants. It is far too lazy to go outside, go down an elevator, walk a few blocks, find a store, buy a candy bar, and eat it. It's just not going to happen. So what does that actually mean for us? It means that we can either focus on logicking people into the office. It's not going to work. A smarter move is to give us an emotional reason to come in. But an even smarter approach is to build a system or process where people feel so much desire and excitement to be with each other that they'll naturally just end up at the office because that's the culture. And so I personally don't waste much time on the logical side. I spend a lot of time on the emotional and design side. And I think what we need to do is design better systems that speak to all of these areas of specialty.
I fully agree. One of the things I'll say to a company, everything you're doing that's logical is going to end up a waste of time. So the bottom line is you can say it doesn't make sense, but human beings are first and foremost emotional. We make our decisions from an emotional place. And if you don't appeal to that, it's very quickly going to go away. Whatever it is they decide. Because we all know we should save. We all know we should eat healthy. We all know we should go to the gym. We all know those things. How many of us do those things? If you don't feel emotionally compelled, if you're not pulled to it, if you don't have, as you said, a community inside of that, you're not going to do it. You're in great shape because you surround yourself with people who are in great shape. It's that simple. It's very difficult to do things on your own. I think it's really important to recognize that when you said the title of your book is You're Invited, and of course, we think about the dinners, but it's actually you're invited into anything, into a community, right?
Yeah.
And so you're invited into this work environment where we're going to come together to build a community. We're going to play together. We're going to innovate together. We're going to create together. We're going to create something bigger than ourselves. We're going to come together and really make this difference in the world. That's a hell of a lot difference than you got to be at back of work. Jon, this has been an absolute pleasure and an honor, sir. Before we finish, a couple of things. First of all, if you had to say one thing that you want the listener to really take away and put into action, we'll know what that is. And then tell us how people can find out more about you, how they can reach out to you, maybe even apply to come to the dinner. Or, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to drop that on you. I can edit that out if you want.
No, it's fine. I don't actually pick who comes to the dinners. So the one thing I would say is that right now people are really fundamentally lonelier and more disconnected than ever. And doesn't seem to be proportionate to level of success. And so my request for everybody is, if there's somebody that you're thinking about, invite them for a walk or a cup of coffee. Invite them to connect or to dinner or to hang out in a park or something like that. Whatever it is, people really need each other right now. They're dealing with a lot more than we realize, and communities are at an all-time low. Now, as far as where you can get a hold of me or if you want to apply for the dinner and all that, we have a website called influence.rs. It spells influencers. You can just reach out about the dinners there, make your recommendations, and everybody who applies gets reviewed. I will point out, though, that we're backlogged at least a year and a half because of the pandemic. We took time off, but we really welcome every and all recommendations. If somebody wants to get a hold of me, you can go to jonlevy.com, JONLEVY.com. You can have a free sample of the first chapter of my book or connect on LinkedIn. I'm super easy to get a hold of. I look forward to hearing from all of your listeners. Well, maybe not all of them, but most. I'm sure some are just people I don't want to talk to. But those other 99%, I'm sure they're fantastic.
Jon, again, it's been a pleasure and an honor, sir.
Thank you, Doug.
I hope you'll stay with us to the end. For you, dear listener, I want to remind you to stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can build community, how you can reach out to others, build that reciprocal vulnerability that creates trust with other people. And I want you to remember something that I think is vastly important, that it's very easy to recognize there's somebody down there who's asking you for money and to not give them the dignity of eye contact. If you can't give them money, I understand that. Give them eye contact. Give them a hello. Don't reach out. Go beyond where you're comfortable. That's number one. Number two is this. So those people are very obviously in need of connection. That's obvious. But what you don't recognize, this is my specialty, so I know it for sure, is that many of the people who are the most successful people you know are often the most lonely people because they think nobody else needs them. So we look at these people who seem to be very extroverted and outgoing and all the rest of it, but they're also lonely. If you want to think about it, think about all the famous people you've heard of who suicided because they were so deeply lonely. So the people who need our love the most are often the people who don't seem to deserve it or don't seem to need it. So check in with the people around you. How often have you asked somebody who seems to always be there for everybody else, how are you doing? How can I be there for you? It's all about community. It's all about relationships. Because human beings are, as Jon talked about, we're driven by emotion. But the number one emotion is love. Now, I'm not asking you about romantic love. but I'm asking you to know that I exist, to validate the existence of another being with caring, with compassion, with empathy. I know you got a lot of shit going on yourself. We all do. But take that moment, and if the only thing you can give is the dignity of a nod or a smile, validation of somebody's day, please do that. I want to thank our guest, Jon Levy, for an amazing conversation. Brilliant man. I hope that you will follow up with Jon and go to his website, buy his books. If you haven't read the books, read them. He's got lots and lots of material, lots of resources for you. Check him out. We'll see you soon. Until then, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. Till next time, Stop Baron. I'm out.